any nation, any organization, or persons that he determined had anything to do with 9/11 or was aiding those that had. And so that's in 2001. And using that authorization, that's the partial justification for both wars, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and everything else the Bush administration did, which included detaining 2 U.S. citizens as unlawful combatants and detaining them in military brig without a grand jury indictment, without trial. And so that was all, at least in part, justified by the congressional authorization for use of military force. And the reason I say in part is because the Bush administration always asserted that he has an independent power as commander-in-chief to do what he wants and does not need congressional authorization. But the point is that Congress gave that authorization, at least for military force. But since then, almost immediately, it was broadened out and interpreted as meaning not just military force, but also military detention, military trial, and rendition to foreign countries. And he began to do that. He used the full spectrum of war powers. In wartime against an enemy, like, say, against the Japanese or Germans in World War II, you can use military force. You can kill them. You can detain them under the laws of war for the duration of the conflict as a POW. And you can also try them for violations of the laws of war. Like we tried the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg, or we tried Japanese generals who had committed atrocities. So that's the full spectrum of power under war. And so even though Congress only said use of force, the Bush administration interpreted that as opening up the window to do everything else. And they interpreted that as meaning they can do it to U.S. citizens, and they did. They detained 2 U.S. citizens as unlawful combatants, Yasser Hamdi and Jose Padilla. And here's the thing, this is important background to understand what the NDAA does, is that the Supreme Court, and also the Fourth Circuit in the Padilla case, but the Supreme Court in the 2004 Hamdi case interpreted the congressional authorization of force of 2001 as authorizing military detention of U.S. citizens. That was one of the arguments. The ACLU and other groups argued that no, it didn't authorize detention of U.S. citizens, and the court said, well, yes, it does. It says any person that he determines had anything to do with 9/11. He can use military force, and if he can use military force, the reason it goes, he can also just detain. So that's the interpretation that's already been given to Congress's authorization, is that it does apply to U.S. citizens. And so that's why when people say, well, the NDAA doesn't apply to U.S. citizens, it's like, look, guys, they've already interpreted Congress as authorizing detention of U.S. citizens. So what does the NDAA do? Well, Congress says in the NDAA of 2012 that we hereby affirm that under the 2001 authorization for use of military force, they affirm that authorization includes the authority for the armed forces of the United States to detain covered persons as defined, in subsection B, pending disposition under the laws of war. And the covered persons, it repeats a lot of the same language of the 2001 authorization. Those had anything to do with, September 11th or harbored those responsible. But then it adds on another category, a person who was a part of or substantially supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners, including any person who has committed a belligerent act or has already supported such hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. So they do broaden the supposed category of people this is going to apply to. The reason why I say supposed is because they always go far beyond. Even this whatever's written down, it's always expanded beyond that. So, but the main thing that this does is different, is that it includes a subsection C. It says disposition under the law of war. It says the disposition of a person under the law of war as described in subsection A may include the following. This is new, first time in writing that Congress has authorized: 1, detention under the law of war without trial until the end of the hostilities authorized by the authorization for use of military force. 2, trial under Chapter 47A of Title 10 United States Code as amended by the Military Commissions Act of 2009. What this means is military trial. And 3, transfer for trial by an alternative court or competent tribunal having lawful jurisdiction. And then it says 4, transfer to the custody or control of the person's country of origin, any other foreign country, or any other foreign entity. And so what this really is that Congress is putting in writing for the first time the full spectrum of claimed powers that the president can use in wartime. they're putting in writing what the Bush administration and the Obama administration has already interpreted the 2001 authorization to authorize. So Congress is just kind of saying, yes, we meant that. We meant that, yes, he can use detention, he can use military trial, and he can even use extraordinary rendition, and we agree that it can be applied to any person. It says any person. And if you go back to the 2001 declaration, any person he decides. And they knowingly, they're doing this with the knowledge that President Bush has already interpreted this power as applying to citizens, that the court has already backed him up on that and interpreted the consent of Congress to detain American citizens. And one more thing is adding on that they're doing this with the knowledge that President Obama has already begun to kill American citizens. His interpretation of his authorization to use military force includes using military force to targeted killings, assassinations of American citizens that he considers to be unlawful enemies under the laws of war. And that's the big point people need to understand, is this is not normal criminal law or normal law under federal statutes. This is the law of war. The claim is that your citizenship or your lawful residency is irrelevant, and the American people can be treated exactly the same as if you were in Iraq or Afghanistan. If you're a goat herder in Iraq or a goat herder in Afghanistan, if you are accused of a normal crime like stealing your neighbor's goat, you'll get a normal trial in the trial, wherever they give you in Iraq or in Afghanistan. But if the U.S. military thinks you're part of the insurgency or you're aiding the insurgency, what happens to you? They just come pick you up. There's no requirement that an Afghan court approve of that first. They just come get you. This is the same claim that they can step outside of normal law, outside of the Constitution, outside of the Bill of Rights. You don't get a grand jury indictment. You don't get a jury trial. None of that is necessary. They just come and get you, and they take you into military jurisdiction exactly as if you were a foreign enemy in wartime. That is what this is doing. That's what they've been doing since 2001. This just says that's okay. But the sleight of hand that Congress has done is they say, well, nothing herein should be interpreted as expanding the powers of the president. But the thing is what they're saying is that